For this 4-piece set, I'm going to keep some of the pretty wood, I'm going to paint the rest, and there'll be a nice pretty reveal at the end. But this video is going to focus more on the modifications I made to the furniture. They're not the most exciting, I guess, but they did make the furniture more functional for the buyer. I'm going to show you how I cut down a huge sheet of plywood to make adjustable shelving, how I modified the cabinet doors by replacing the center panel, and one of my favorite details from vintage furniture was missing. So I'm going to use some of the scrap lumber to make a replacement. I'm Amy. I build and revive furniture, often adding something new to something old. I'm sharing tips, tricks, and methods on how to give old pieces a new lease on life. Welcome to my shop. This 4-piece set is pretty banged up and, in my opinion, not a candidate for restoration. If you would have taken this on, I'd have major respect for your skills, but this is not considered antique, so I'm not devaluing it by refinishing. The outsides have tons of deep scratches, gouges, and other damage, but the insides are in extremely good condition. This is a very well-made set of furniture, and that's why I bought it. But if you're not a fan of painted furniture, you may just want to click away now. When I first got this piece into my shop, I didn't think these cubbies were original to the piece. Plus, this is going to be used as a dresser, and I wasn't convinced this was the most functional way to use the space. So I pulled it out. And honestly, it did look like it was factory installed, but it was particle board with a vinyl overlay. I think drawers in here would be ideal, but I'm not quite that skilled. Plus, building drawers would take so much time, and I'm probably never going to get that back in the sale price. But just to make sure, I polled my Instagram followers to see what they think. When I pull the cubbies out of the dresser, I noticed the bottom of the cabinet didn't have a solid panel, so I'll need to add that. There's a little ledge here that's exactly ½ an inch deep. After my extremely detailed and very professional sketch, I landed on 2 adjustable shelves that need to be about 36 inches wide. The other issue I wanted to address was on these nightstands. So let's talk about this metal mesh on the doors for a minute. I think they work with the original design of the piece, so I'm not criticizing. Okay, maybe I am. I have a couple of issues. First, they collect so much dust, and they're allowing dust to get into the cabinet too. And second, I don't know about you, but what's behind cabinet doors in my house, it isn't always neat and pretty. Cabinet doors are supposed to hide what's inside. So I want to pull this mesh out and replace it with a solid panel. And since I'm already spending way too much time on this set, I'll go ahead and add an adjustable shelf here too. Why not? One of my favorite details from vintage furniture are these little valet trays. They're almost always in one of the top drawers, and they're either affixed to the side or they ride along a little track. But a lot of times they're missing. This tray is from a completely different dresser. I'm just trying to get an idea of what size it would have been. Even though it won't be an exact replica, I'm going to use leftover wood and make a new one. So I went to my local lumber store and I picked up a 4x8 sheet of walnut plywood. It's not safe for me to try and wrangle such a large sheet on my table saw, so I break it down into manageable sizes first. I cover my large assembly table with these rigid foam insulation tiles. Then I lay the sheet down on the table with the best side facing down. Then, and this is important, I plan my cuts. This material is not cheap, and if my dimensions are off, I could waste a lot of material. And unlike every woodworker on YouTube, I do not have a fancy green track saw. I use a metal clamp rail and my trusty DeWalt circ saw. While the saw is unplugged, I adjust the blade depth to slightly more than ½ an inch to start making the cuts. My dimensions are oversized by about an inch, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. This rail has an extension so I can make the long cuts too. Now I can trim all these pieces to final size on the table saw. Also, it's really easy to get my pieces confused, so after I make the initial cuts, I marked every piece with the final dimensions. You can see here I switched from the table saw fence to the miter gauge to make these cuts. If you're new to using a table saw or you're interested in learning, it's important to understand basic table saw safety, and it's crucial to understand the difference between rip cuts and cross cuts. There's an extremely common and dangerous accident that can happen when a piece of wood gets pinched between the saw blade and the fence. It can cause the wood to be forcibly ejected back towards where the saw operator or anyone is standing nearby. This is called kickback, and it's responsible for many serious injuries. Although I have a riving knife on my saw, and that's a bare minimum precaution, you also never ever want to try and make a cross cut using the fence. Use a cross cut tool like a miter gauge, or use a different tool altogether. It's not worth risking serious injury. That all being said, the table saw is my most valuable, versatile tool in my shop. Seriously, if you told me I had to give up every tool in my shop and just keep one, this would be it. So if you're serious about learning how to use it, I'm gonna link a few videos down in the description. The shelves are going to need a trim piece to hide the plywood edges. I could use edge banding, but I had some hardwood on my shelf that I can stain to match. Now that all the panels are done, I'm taking some of the thin offcuts from the shelf trim to make the new valet tray. When you're cutting thin pieces, it's important to think through your cuts and make sure you have push blocks that'll keep your hands well away from the blade. After measuring and cutting the plywood bottom, I took the thin side pieces and used glue and brad nails to assemble it. When I first started woodworking, I used brad nails to assemble small pieces like this, not realizing they don't hold parts together very well. I learned you needed to use both glue and brad nails. The glue is what will hold the parts together permanently. The brad nails will hold the pieces together temporarily until the glue dries. You can also use clamps if you don't have a brad nailer or the pieces are just too small for nailing. Before I move on, I'm using this shelf pin jig so that the shelves have multiple positions. This jig lines up the holes evenly. You can make your own template using scrap wood, but I did a big cabinet project a few years ago and this was really handy. So, as I said before, this video is more focused on how I made a few modifications to these pieces to make them more functional. But I did spend a lot of time repairing, stripping, sanding, and painting. And as I said in the beginning, this set was pretty banged up, and I didn't consider it a candidate for restoration to its original condition. So I applied multiple coats of primer and multiple coats of a durable cabinet grade paint. The last steps are gluing and nailing this bottom panel inside the cabinet and testing to make sure my shelf pin holes are even. And one of my favorite parts, installing the new hardware. So, here's a reminder of where we started. And here's how it looks now. Let's say I was refinishing this set just for you. Would you have kept the metal cabinet doors and the cubbies, or would you have had me change it? I got a lot of inquiries on this set and it sold really quickly. It's now being used and enjoyed in someone's home, and honestly, that's my goal, to rescue well-made furniture and save it from being thrown out. I've already moved on to my next project and I can't wait to share it with you. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.